The crisp autumn air carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves across the sprawling estate of Gatcombe Park. Inside the main house, a fire crackled in the grate of the library, casting long shadows across the shelves lined with leather-bound books. Princess Anne stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the rolling hills of the Gloucestershire countryside that had been her home for nearly 5 decades. At 74, her posture remained as rigid as it had been in her youth, a lifetime of royal duty etched into the very bones of her frame. Behind her, the documents lay spread across the mahogany desk, legal papers, financial statements, and the preliminary drafts of a transfer of ownership that would change everything. The decision had not come easily. For months she had wrestled with the weight of it, lying awake in the early hours while the house settled around her with its familiar creaks and whispers. Gatcombe was more than a residence. It was the embodiment of her independent spirit, the one place where she had carved out a life separate from the relentless glare of the palace machinery. Her mother had given her this estate in 1976, a wedding present that cost the crown approximately £500,000, a sanctuary where she could be simply a woman who loved horses and the land. The Princess Royal turned from the window and walked to the desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a framed photograph showing her late mother on horseback, the Queen's smile wide and unguarded. That was what this place did. It stripped away the formality and allowed for something real. But reality also meant confronting hard truths. The cost of living crisis had swept through Britain like a storm, and even the royal estates were not immune to its fury. Inflation had driven up every expense associated with maintaining the 700-acre property, from the feed for her Gloucester Old Spot pigs to the diesel for the farm vehicles. The cancellation of the Festival of British Eventing the previous year had been the first devastating blow. For 40 years, the event had brought the world's top equestrians and over 40,000 spectators to her doorstep, a celebration of the sport she loved more than any other. But the numbers had stopped adding up. Insurance costs had skyrocketed in the wake of the pandemic, and the revenue no longer justified the enormous logistical effort. Mark Phillips, her first husband and the father of her children, had been blunt about it. The dream that had begun over 4 decades ago had run its course. Anne pulled out the chair and sat down heavily, a rare concession to the weariness that had been creeping into her bones. The festival's demise had left a gaping hole in the estate's finances. She had always prided herself on making Gatcombe pay its own way, refusing to be a burden on the taxpayer. "This is not something that comes free," she had once told the BBC. "This has got to pay its way. Otherwise, I can't stay here." Those words now felt like a prophecy she was fighting to fulfill. Her farming operation, the native breeds of White Park cattle, Wiltshire horn sheep, and those beloved Gloucester Old Spots, was keeping the wolf from the door, the sale of high-quality meat to local butchers and markets, providing a steady, if modest, income. It was a commercial decision, this move to rare breeds, driven by the hard economic reality that they commanded premium prices and cost less to maintain, leaving a lighter carbon footprint in the process. But farming alone could not sustain the historic house, the outbuildings, the staff, and the endless maintenance required by a property that had stood since the late 18th century. The door opened softly, and Sir Timothy Lawrence entered, his presence a quiet comfort after 32 years of marriage. He placed a cup of tea on the coaster beside her, a small ritual they had observed for decades. "Still looking at those papers?" he asked, his voice gentle. Anne nodded, not looking up. "I keep thinking there must be another way, another event we could organize, another stream of income we haven't considered." Timothy pulled up a chair and sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "You've considered everything, my dear. We both have. The numbers are what they are." She knew he was right. He had been by her side through every financial decision, every difficult choice required to keep the estate afloat. They had diversified where they could, even renting out stabling to elite riders like Team GB's Tom McEwen, who paid for the privilege of keeping his horses on grounds that had produced some of the nation's finest equestrian talent. But these were stopgaps, not solutions. The heart of the matter was succession. Anne was not getting any younger, and the specter of inheritance tax loomed over Gatcombe like a guillotine. Recent changes to agricultural property relief meant that farms valued above £1 million would face a 20% tax upon inheritance, a rule that would apply mercilessly to her children, Peter and Zara, unless careful planning was undertaken. Unlike the sovereign-to-sovereign exemption that protected Balmoral and Sandringham when passed from monarch to heir, Gatcombe enjoyed no such privilege. Peter and Zara, for all their hard work and devotion to the family legacy, would be liable for a tax bill that could run into millions. The thought kept Anne awake at night, that her beloved home, the place where her children had grown up riding ponies and running through the fields, might have to be sold to settle a debt to the government. It was unthinkable, and yet the alternative, simply handing it over to them now, carried its own risks. Both Peter and Zara had full lives of their own, with families and careers. Peter had recently separated from his wife Autumn and was navigating the complexities of co-parenting their 2 daughters. Zara was immersed in her own equestrian pursuits and raising her 3 children with Mike Tyndall at Aston Farm, the converted farmhouse on the estate's eastern edge. Neither of them had asked for the burden of managing a 700-acre estate. But it was the other name on the papers that caused Anne to pause, her pen hovering over the signature line. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, her nephew William's wife, the woman who had seamlessly transitioned from commoner to future queen with a grace that even the most hardened palace courtiers could not help but admire. The idea had first surfaced months ago, during a private lunch at Kensington Palace. Anne had been discussing the challenges at Gatcombe, perhaps more candidly than she usually would, when Catherine had leaned forward with that earnest expression she wore when genuinely engaged. "There must be something we can do to help," she had said. "The estate is part of the family's heritage. It matters." Anne had smiled politely and changed the subject, but the seed had been planted. Catherine understood heritage. She understood the delicate balance between public duty and private life, having navigated it herself with remarkable poise. More importantly, she understood the importance of places like Gatcombe, sanctuaries where the next generation of royals could experience something resembling normal life, away from the flashbulbs and the formalities. Highgrove was just 6 miles away, William's beloved country retreat where he had found solace after the loss of his mother. Having Catherine as the steward of Gatcombe would create a contiguous block of family land, a royal enclave in the Cotswolds that could serve the monarchy for generations. The logistics were daunting. Gatcombe was not just a house, it was a working farm, a historic listed building, and a private residence all rolled into one. The main house, built between 1771 and 1774 for the clothier Edward Shepherd, and later remodeled by the architect George Basavi for the economist David Ricardo, was a Grade 2-star listed property of immense architectural significance. Its 5 main bedrooms, 4 secondary bedrooms, 4 reception rooms, library, billiard room, and music hall required constant upkeep, all regulated by strict heritage guidelines. The parkland itself was separately listed, a designed landscape of approximately 35 hectares with belts of mature trees, scattered clumps, and 2 small lakes created by damming a stream that flowed through the valley. Then there was the farm, the rare breeds, the equine facilities, the commercial operations that kept the whole enterprise ticking over. Whoever took control would need to understand not just the romance of the place, but the gritty reality of making it pay. Anne thought about Catherine's journey. The girl from Bucklebury who had captured her nephew's heart at university, who had endured years of relentless media scrutiny with a dignity that belied her years, who had thrown herself into royal work while raising 3 young children. She had also, Anne noted with approval, embraced the countryside life with genuine enthusiasm. She rode well, she understood horses, and she had shown a keen interest in the farming operation during her visits. There was a practicality to Catherine that Anne recognized and respected, a no-nonsense approach to problems that mirrored her own. If anyone could take on the challenge of Gatcombe, it was her. But would she want to? The question nagged at Anne as she finally set down the pen and reached for her tea. Catherine was already stretched thin, balancing royal duties with the demands of young family life. Adding the management of a large estate to that load was no small ask. And yet, there was also the question of what Catherine would gain, a place of her own, separate from the formal residences, where she could put down roots and create a legacy for her children. Anmer Hall in Norfolk was lovely, but it was leased from the Queen. Gatcombe would be different. Gatcombe would be hers. The weeks that followed were filled with hushed conversations and careful diplomacy. Anne traveled to Windsor for a private meeting with the King, her brother Charles, now wearing the crown that had once rested on their mother's head. They sat in the gardens of Frogmore, the conversation ranging from estate management to the future of the monarchy. Charles, who had transformed Highgrove into an organic showcase over 4 decades, understood better than anyone the weight of such a decision. "She has the right temperament," he said of Catherine, his voice carrying the reflective tone he adopted when discussing serious matters. "And she understands the land. That's more important than people realize." Anne nodded, relieved to have his blessing. The King's approval was not strictly necessary. Gatcombe was hers to do with as she wished. But the family dynamics mattered. The monarchy functioned best when it functioned as a unit, and this decision would ripple outward for decades. The approach to Catherine was made during a weekend gathering at Balmoral, the great Scottish estate where the family traditionally gathered to decompress from the pressures of public life. Anne found her opportunity during a long walk across the moors, the heather blooming purple under a wide September sky. They walked side by side, the two of them, dogs ranging ahead, the conversation flowing easily from horses to children to the challenges of maintaining historic properties. Anne spoke candidly about the pressures at Gatcombe, the financial realities, the inheritance tax nightmare that kept her awake. Catherine listened, asking intelligent questions that revealed a deeper understanding than Anne had anticipated. When Anne finally broached the subject directly, "I've been thinking about the future, about who might take on Gatcombe when I'm no longer able." Catherine's step faltered only slightly. "I'm honored you would even consider me," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm qualified to manage something so complex." Anne waved away the objection. "Nobody is qualified until they do it. I certainly wasn't when I started. But you have something better than qualifications. You have the right instincts." The conversation continued over the remaining days of the Balmoral visit, and then in subsequent phone calls and private meetings. William was brought into the discussions, his support for his wife unwavering, but tempered by concern about the additional burden. "She already does so much," he pointed out to Anne during one private conversation. "I know," Anne replied, "but this isn't a burden. This is an opportunity, a place that's truly hers, that she can shape and build and pass on to George someday. Think about what that would mean." William was silent for a long moment, and Anne knew she had reached him. The thought of George, her great-nephew and future king, grow up with a genuine country estate, learning to ride and shoot and manage land as generations of royals had done before him, that was a legacy worth building. The negotiations, such as they were, proceeded with the discretion that characterized royal family dealings. Lawyers for both sides drafted agreements, financial advisors crunched numbers, and estate managers prepared detailed briefings on the operational realities of Gatcombe. Anne insisted on transparency. Catherine should know exactly what she was taking on before any final decision was made. There were tours of the farm, meetings with the staff who had served Anne for decades, and long conversations about the rare breeds program that had become the estate's financial lifeline. Catherine immersed herself in the details, asking about rotational grazing, the genetics of the White Park cattle, the market for Gloucester Old Spot pork. She met with the estate manager, reviewed the accounts, and spent a day shadowing the team that kept the whole operation running. By the end of it,